Yo, what up? The other day, I came across a tweet that really stood out to me, and I think is indicative of Pokemon's weird state as a whole right now. The tweet says, the most broken Pokemon in Champions, locked beyond 30 hours of gameplay on a $70 game, is number 670 in the Pokedex. At a glance, this is a really, really funny tweet, because of how silly it is. Locked behind gameplay is a phrase that sounds bad no matter the context, but I do want to take an earnest look at this and try to see how the competitive and casual Pokemon mindsets differ and the issues this can create. And a lot of that comes from how one views a Pokemon to begin with. I'll try and steelman this dude's argument here, because it's unfair to just point a finger and laugh, and I actually have a point I'm working towards here. The main thing here is that he wants to play specifically competitive Pokemon. It's not about going for a story, a region, or what he finds along the way. His interest is playing just this one aspect of Pokemon. And that's where the issue comes. Trying to make a team the legitimate way, while only caring about the end result, can feel like huge grind work, and it very literally is in some ways. There's also the argument that people have to buy these expensive games to get these strong Pokemon, and how this adds a lot of barriers. If you want a Raging Bolt, you need to buy Pokemon Scarlet with its DLC for €95. If you picked Violet simply because you liked Miraidon more, or if you just put no thought into it at all, that's a big sudden investment. For Raging Bolt, you'd also have to play these games for many, many hours, considering Raging Bolt alone has some of the harshest unlock conditions in the series, because it's locked behind filling up your Pokédex significantly in the DLC post-game. And I do think these complaints are legitimate, if all you care about is competitive. And that's sort of where the issue lies, and why I think this causes serious friction. Because Pokemon isn't just a competitive game. If anything, Pokemon is one of the most casual franchises out there. By definition of the terms, casual players are just the majority outright. These are people that buy a game, have their fun with their playthrough, probably drop it after. But then there's a bit of a split, because Pokemon has multiple appeals. I'm going to use two terms for this: hardcore players and competitive players. You may think that competitive players are by definition the hardcore ones, but let me explain. Because yes, competitive players are undeniably hardcore, considering just the sheer amount of matchups, movesets, obscure mechanics, and even player psychology you need to understand to start getting good at it. These are the people that just want to do player versus player matches first and foremost. I think I've laid out what I mean with a competitive player, so let's talk about the other side of the coin with what I define as a hardcore fan, rather than a competitive player. Pokemon has always had a very different charm that I'd argue is more central to the franchise appeal as a whole: the journey itself. For a hardcore player, a Pokemon game is often about the game itself. It's about getting the most out of the game. In a small Discord group, my online mates and I spend a lot of time working on getting the most out of Pokemon together. When Fire Red and Leaf Green re-released, our first questions were simple: who grabs what version? Who grabs what starter? Who grabs what fossil? Immediately, the barriers themselves became a social event and a story. The boons and banes of each version immediately became a question that affected how our own journeys would go. And in a way, it's some of the most fun I've ever had with Pokemon, just shooting the shit with some friends as we got through and shared our own journeys. All with the goal of filling our own dexes, once we get to an IRL meetup in a few months to make those trades. And that's where the question of Eternal Flower Floette comes in. Making this Pokemon hard to obtain by being a post-game Pokemon from a new game is great from one perspective and terrible from another. Because in a competitive group, this means playing a game with a new style you might not care for. And while personally I think ZA is the best Pokemon game in many years, it's fundamentally different from what a competitive player wants. Even its online is just aimed at a very different group of people for the most part. That's $70 in 30 hours doing something you don't like for just one Pokemon. From this competitive perspective, it really, really sucks that this Pokemon is so special. It feels like pay to win, and it's no wonder people test these sets quickly in an environment like Showdown, where you can experiment with teams before any big investment. Yet from the hardcore perspective, this dynamic flips entirely. This is the kind of Pokemon you whip out during a casual round to blow the other way, to go, yeah, see how much I worked for this? It's a reward for a journey you've undergone, a story you enjoyed, and a final gift from a character that could have made a real impact on you. From this perspective, you get more fun out of the Pokemon being somewhat special and exclusive. The work put into it outright increases how much fun it is to use it, and how meaningful it is to have it. that Light of Ruin isn't the key that makes you win a tournament, it's the reward for winning the game itself. I'm trying to be kind and reasonable to the competitive perspective here, but to someone like me, there's something that's lost when making a Pokémon more common. And I don't mean that if Eternal Floette returns in a future game where it's easier to get, it will suddenly make the one I have lose its charm. Yet a lot of its current charm comes from the fact that right now, you can't get it elsewhere. I have a lot of Caldeos from different games and different distributions, but the one that's most special is the one that came from driving to a distant mall with my dad for an event distribution all the way in Gen 5. I'm glad everyone can catch it now in ZA and Sword and Shield so it doesn't end up permanently lost to anyone. But at first one remains more meaningful because, for a good while, that was the only one I could ever get. If Keldeo had always been normal, I wouldn't have had that drive with my dad to see a new place I hadn't ever been before. Now if you're a competitive player, I do think there are solutions for them to get past these barriers, like getting the Pokémon from a friend or the global trade station in home. But these have their own issues, like just not having the right friends, and the GTS being filled with spammy, nonsensical trade offers. There's also Pokémon Go getting you a ton of special Pokémon, like legendaries if you played hardcore. Yeah, that's another can of worms, and has its own huge pay-to-play element to it. They're worth exploring if you really do need a lot of these Pokémon, but don't want to or can't afford to get a version exclusive. Still, I do think people underestimate how troublesome these can still be if you really do just want to make their team and test it quickly. Am I offering a meaningful solution here? Not really, no. But I want to explain why a take like this gets mocked in a coherent way, while also trying to be fair to the actual dude at hand. I don't know him personally, I don't care for competitive, and I do think it ultimately sounds very silly. But what I'm trying to say is that appealing to the competitive players comes at a cost that many of them don't really seem to understand, because it's not really the game they're playing themselves. All in all, I just don't really want the process of actually getting the Pokémon to be watered down, since that tramples on my own fun. I don't expect to change minds, but maybe it'll give you a clearer idea of why I don't think this will change anytime soon. Because I think Game Freak is very aware of these arguments as well, and doesn't want to tip these scales too heavily in favour of one over the other. Hell, a Pokémon so exclusive being usable in a game like Champions at all is probably because even Champions wants to appeal to hardcore and competitive players alike, and there certainly is a big overlap between the two, even if I'm splitting them apart in this analysis. I think it's probably better to seek a real change about such rare Pokémon than it is to demand the Pokémon be less rare, but even that has issues and I've rambled for long enough. For now, I just hope you have a lovely one, and it'd be cool if you liked this and subscribed in case I make more videos talking about this kind of stuff. I'm thinking about making a video about some of the more questionable decisions in Monster Hunter Wilds, so stick around if you want that kind of thing. Also, to be clear, I do think you can be both hardcore and competitive, a lot of players are, but I split the categories up to make a clear case without getting bogged down in the nuances, since that would actually make it harder to explain the issues that really matter here. All in all, just have a lovely one. Goodbye.